And we are live. Hello, everyone. Are we doing up? Let me put the headphones on. Hello, hello. Up. That can go aside. So, welcome for the news review of the week that is on a Wednesday and not on a Tuesday because yesterday my voice was fucked. So yeah, catching up on yesterday. I mean, nothing bad. I just like I had my voice a bit like this, and so I figured, yeah, okay, I'm gonna play it safe, let the voice rest, especially since next week I have Euroguesser, so I really can't have my voice going away. So I took the evening easily, drank a lot of tea, still have my tea, and so yeah, we're doing the news review tonight. Plenty of things to talk about, so it's all good. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Let me double check that I'm forgetting nothing. Yes, we are of course live also on Twitter. If you're watching from Twitter and you want to participate in the chat, you have a link below to join the Twitch. And there you can join the Happy Gang in chat and discuss. So otherwise, I guess we can go. Program of the day up there. Program of the day. So we're going to talk about. So this week is summits everywhere. EU leaders are meeting today in Belgium. They are meeting the rest of the weekend in Munich for the. Yeah, it's the Munich conference to talk about defense. So there's a lot of meeting. We're going to focus on the EU one that is taking place today no, tomorrow. Tomorrow is Thursday. So on Thursday, where they're going to talk about, okay, we have agreed sort of that the EU should become more independent / autonomous. There's a question of competitivity. How do we achieve that with lots of proposals that were put on the table and a clash that is going to take place, that is taking place, notably between France on one side and France and Germany Germany and Italy, sorry, on the other. So we're going to talk about that meeting and that meeting and the upcoming divisions. Then we're going to stay kind of on the same topic, but focus more precisely on a topic that has been around for quite a while actually in the EU bubble, but that is becoming increasingly in focus. And particularly discussed these past few weeks rather, is the question of European preference. So, which is a long-standing French demand. So the idea that on some market, on all markets, that's one part of the discussion. Should you give priority to European companies or not? And so there's an ongoing debate about that. And again, France fighting against pretty much everyone else. I was going to say Germany and Italy, but pretty much everyone else. So we're going to zoom in a bit on that topic that I don't think we really discussed in depth in a previous news review. So that will be a good place to do it. And to finish, we're going to read an article about. So Politico released an article about Ukraine, the plans to potentially make Ukraine join the EU in 2027. So there's a 5-point plan. Orban was furious about it. He tweeted about it today, etc. So we're going to read that article and discuss whether or not Ukraine is going to join the EU in 2027 or not. So that's the program. As usual, if there are other things you want to discuss, well, you have 10 fingers, you have a chat. You use the 10 fingers, and we will discuss it. For Call of Tenders, yeah, that's mostly, when we talk about the EU preference, it's mostly, I mean, there are different versions of the European preference. You have one version that is for the public tender. So when states, public authorities are issuing a contract, you have then versions where in certain critical sectors, you should also keep away non-European companies to boost our own content, etc., etc., etc. So you have different versions, let's say, of the EU preference. You have also the dimension on a number of EU budgets. Should the EU money go to European companies in priority or not? So you have different versions, or at least different extent to which you can push the idea of EU preference, and that is the extent of which is kind of the key element of the debate. Like the idea, the principle of EU preference is becoming increasingly, if not now, fully accepted. The question is, how do you define EU preference and how far do you push it? That's where the debate is now going. But we'll discuss it. So yeah, let's get into it. Yep, that's the right one. So first, let's have a bird's eye view on the what is at stake in the meetings that are taking place this week between EU leaders, and that are meeting like in various forum. Today, for instance, like a bunch of them were at a meeting organized in Antwerp by basically the industry. That is a format that was created in 2024, if I recall correctly, where you have the big European industry that is making a push to influence European politics. Say, okay, this is what our industry needs to thrive. That has become a relatively influential place, and so today was the second edition of that meeting, and you had a bunch of EU and national leaders going there. There was von der Leyen, Bart de Wever, you had Macron. I don't recall if Merz spoke. I'm not certain. So you had a bunch of national leaders and EU leaders speaking there to say what is their plan to increase competitivity, to help European industry, etc. So that was the first thing. Tomorrow they're meeting again in Belgium, like having a kind of a brainstorming session again on on competitiveness rather, in good English. And then during the weekend they're gonna meet in Munich to discuss about defense. And so a bunch of old topics are coming back and dividing the EU as usual. So, sorry, still have that goddamn cough. Sorry about that. So Europe's push to go it alone exposes old fault lines. The renewed drive to reduce reliance on Washington is bringing up familiar disagreements ahead of an EU leaders summit on Thursday. EU leaders are gearing up for major fights over issues ranging from joint defense projects to economic reforms, as a drive to loosen Europe's dependence on Donald Trump's America lays bare deep divisions among the bloc's 27 countries. Ahead of an informal leaders' retreat on Thursday focused on competitiveness, capitals have pledged to show unity and plot a path toward greater European autonomy after the US president's threat against Greenland set off the worst transatlantic crisis in decades. So, everyone now is kind of accepting the fact that, okay, the old school US-EU alliance is kind of a thing of the past, or at least it's not as reliable as it used to be, so we need to become more autonomous, more independent. And so how do we achieve this? That's the big question. How fast do you achieve this? And that's why you need leaders to meet and hash it out and come and agree on a common line on how the EU should achieve that. Like, the whether it should achieve that is, I think, a past debate. Like, most have accepted that it's going to happen. The question is, how do we achieve it, and at which speed and in which area? But as leaders prepare for their summit, that united front is already cracking, and long-standing disagreements are resurfacing over how to turn lofty ambitions for strategic independence into concrete action. While the meeting is not expected to produce binding commitment, it will set a broad political direction for the European Commission, which is due to draw up proposals ahead of a formal summit in late March. So again, we are in the format of European Council, so it's European head of states and government, and European Council, its main job, or one of its jobs, is to give the political guidelines to the Commission. The leaders are gathering and they're saying, okay, we want the EU to go that direction, Commission, make it happen. And then the Commission makes it happen through its policies. And so now we know that late March, Commission is supposed to come back with proposals to the member states. But first, the member states need to clarify exactly how far they want the Commission to go or not go when it comes to these topics of strategic independence of the EU, notably in the context of the rift with the US. But not only. Just give me a sec. Let me come back to my thing there. Everyone around the table must face a moment of truth, said Manfred Weber, leader of the EPP, whose members include German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Leaders should not complain about each other, but do their homework to ensure reforms can be completed, he added. Estonian Foreign Minister Magnus Tsakna, allez, let's go for Tsakna, told Politico ahead of the summit that Europe has lots of leverage, we just need to stick together and make decisions instead of whining and complaining. We need to understand that through strength, Europe will actually have a firm position. A glaring example is the recent disagreement between EU powerhouses, France and Germany, whose leaders clashed over Emmanuel Macron's refusal to endorse the EU-Mercosur trade deal. Famously, so EU-Mercosur trade deal, approved by leaders months ago. France was isolated, did not vote voted against the deal in council. Despite concession made by the Commission to regarding farmers, etc., but the political situation in France was such that, I mean, there was nothing the Commission could do to obtain a positive vote or even an abstention of France on that file. It's too politically toxic in France, and so France voted against it, which of course was not very pleasing for Germany, because Germany, on the contrary, was very much in favor of that agreement. So in an interview published Tuesday by several European newspapers, the French president trumpeted the need for joint European borrowing to finance ambitious industrial and defense projects, a call that was promptly rebuffed by Germany. So France, Macron has pushed again for nothing completely new, something that has been doing the rounds for a while, the idea of joint procurement, so common EU debt, so the EU collectively borrowing money on the markets to then invest, like it did for COVID, the COVID recovery fund, the post-COVID fund was the EU that for the first time went on the market to borrow money and then investing it left, right, and center. And so Macron said, okay, given that we need a lot of investment in key sectors, notably defense, notably new tech, etc., we need again to borrow money on the market. The EU needs to borrow again money on the market to finance all this. And Germany said no. Germany being historically not so keen, to say the least, on common EU debt. But again, that was not very surprising, and those are all the oppositions. The point of, I mean, I made a post on that on Twitter. Like the French idea of joint EU borrowing is an old idea. It's been going around forever. The French have been pushing very hard for it ever since the COVID crisis, saying, okay, we did the COVID fund, we need to do it again to finance other things, because I mean, what's the point of the advantage of joint EU borrowing is that you can get a lot of money, because the EU is considered a safe bet, and so you can raise a lot of money on the market without too much problem. So you can get a lot of money quickly without having to mobilize the national budgets that are in most countries pretty tight already, and so there's no margin of maneuvers to throw money around for massive investment projects. So that's the advantage of the joint EU borrowing, is that you can get that money. It's not tied directly to one budget, one country. And it's tied to the EU budget in general, so everyone is collectively responsible for it. And then you can use it to invest in whatever you need to invest on. So that's relatively useful for this, and there's been like lots of push for new joint borrowing, whether in general like new joint borrowing to finance the EU, or to focus on some particular area that the EU needs a lot of money very very quickly, particularly on defense and new technologies. But historically, you have a bunch of countries led by Germany that are definitely not in favor of EU borrowing, because they see that as something that is kind of... they accepted it for COVID because it was COVID, and under the condition that it was like a one-off thing. But also, they're not big fans of it because they are afraid that, given the economic situations of a number of countries, notably France, if there was joint borrowing, actually the ones who could end up on the line to pay back could be the Germans, because they are the Germans and Nordic countries in particular, because they are those who have like tight economies, etc., etc. Considering the debt issue in France, I don't think they should be able to tell others that the EU should borrow money. I mean, that's one of the things that comes back, like in terms of credibility. You have quite a few, because typically those in favor of joint EU debt are the southern EU countries that tend to have economies that are not exactly in tip-top form and relatively high levels of debts. And so when they make calls for new debt, for EU debt, the other are like, yeah, okay, so because you don't have money, you want us to borrow money to guarantee that money that then we can invest in your countries. Yeah, that's not going to work. Sort out your economy first, and then we can talk about borrowing money collectively, etc. We need to be at the same level, because otherwise it's me who is on the line and not you. So indeed, there's a question of credibility when France and other like Southern Europe countries are calling for massive new EU debt, because they're not, yeah, but like your debt is not sustainable, etc. So why should we do this at European level? And also, there's like a more complicated issue with joint EU borrowing. That's the slight issue, very small issue, tiny bit, a detail really. The small problem that if you borrow money, well, at some point you need to pay it back. It's not free money, you're supposed to pay it back. And usually, people are relatively discreet on that part of the equation, on how do you pay back. Bearing in mind that it's not a small amount of money to give you a starting point. So I told you the only example that exists today of joint EU borrowing is the COVID fund. 750 billion euro that the EU borrowed on the market to help the economic recovery after COVID. That 750 billion will start to be reimbursed from 2028. So from the next long-term budget. And it's not a small sum because from 2028, the EU will have to, because again, it's the European budget that has to reimburse. It's not national budget, it's EU budget. The EU budget will have to pay between 25 and 30 billion euro every year, which is roughly 15% of the entire EU budget. So somehow, from 2028, we have to find a way to dedicate 15% of the EU budget to starting to reimburse the COVID debt. And the issue is that, okay, it's 15%. You could say, oh, well, we just have to find 15, we just need to find like between 25 and 30 billion euros to pay back new money. Problem is that member states don't want to pay more because it's not popular to say, yeah, okay, I'm going to increase the money I send to Brussels. Not really popular. And at the same time, they don't want the EU to have what is called own resources, so money that Europe can get by itself. Like today, when you are a civil servant, when you are working for the Commission, working for the Parliament, etc., like you don't pay your taxes to Belgium, France, or whatever country. You pay your taxes to the EU. And so the taxes you pay to the EU go to the EU budget. That's the own resource. Likewise, we have part of VAT that goes to the EU budget, etc., etc. That's roughly 1/3 of the EU budget. And so, if you want to generate new money without asking the member state, well, you need those own resources. But member states don't want, or are not so keen on, because they see that as potential losses for their own budget. They see that as potentially something that would tax their own companies, their own people, etc. So they're really no big fans, and so you find yourself in a situation where you already have to reimburse like the equivalent of 15% of your budget for the COVID debt, and you would want to add new debt on top of that without creating new sources of revenues for the EU. So you want to do new joint borrowing. Where the money comes from to reimburse that, let's not talk about it. Which again is undermining the credibility and the viability of new joint EU borrowing, because of course, that's kind of an issue. Sorry, just moving that. There. Where was I? You will have seen the interview with the French president. The French president published today, said the senior German government official, I'm struggling today, granted anonymity. We think that this distracts a little from what it's actually all about, namely that we have a productivity problem. Other capitals were quick to chime in. It's good that Macron sees the need to invest in Europe's future economy, said the EU diplomat from a mid-sized country. But, the diplomat added, such a push amounts to daydreaming given the possibility to spend via the EU long-term budget. In his interview, Macron also threatened to suspend the Franco-German program to jointly develop a battle tank after a blame game over the lack of progress on a joint fighter jet program. So I'm not going to go into it. You have Franco-German fights on the joint jet fighter program, which is like on its way out, about to die, and so blame game on who is responsible for what. And so Macron said, okay, you can imagine that if the German partner questioned the future of the joint plane, we would have to question the joint tank. So, tit for tat. It's one of dozens of fault lines being exposed ahead of Thursday's retreat in a flurry of position papers from EU capitals. While France is advocating buy European policies that would prioritize EU industries for subsidies and public procurement contracts, Nordic and Baltic countries have pushed back against the idea in a joint position paper, saying it would add unwanted complexity just as Europe is trying to deregulate. We'll talk about that afterwards. At the same time, Germany has joined forces with Italy to push back against French initiatives, instead promoting an agenda heavily focused on deregulation. In a joint discussion paper backed by Merz and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, they call for an emergency brake on new EU legislation, granting capitals the right to stop Brussels from coming up with laws they don't like. So basically, Merz and Meloni, they want to be able, they want to reintroduce unanimity in pretty much any economic or single market file, which is normally decided at a majority, which is a way to tell the Commission you need to do as little law as possible or as weak law as possible, because otherwise if you do something a bit complicated or that demands us to move on something, well, someone will put a veto, a de facto veto via the emergency brake, and your legislation will be blocked. So we already had the push to deregulate through simplification. They want to go even further by basically preventing new laws from coming up in the future. But diplomats from other countries argue that the Berlin-Rome push misses the larger point, which is that Europe needs to wean itself off foreign dependencies. Simplification/deregulation is important, said a second EU diplomat. But it cannot be the alpha and the omega of our European policy. Bureaucracy is not everything. We urgently need to think about supply chains and how to reduce our dependencies. A third EU diplomat put the situation bluntly. We have the diagnosis, we have the prescription, we haven't gone to the pharmacy. Diagnosis being Draghi report, prescription, deregulation, and pharmacy, well, actually, we're not doing what is needed to be done. If these are... I mean, it depends on how you're reading the diagnosis and prescription. You could also say that diagnosis is that we're lacking competitiveness. And so prescription, you need to boost competitiveness, and then we haven't picked up the right medicine at the pharmacy to do that yet. If these disagreements are now emerging into the cold light of day, it's because leaders who have long avoided difficult conversation about internal reforms can no longer afford to do so. Trump's threat against Greenland triggered a reckoning among leaders during an extraordinary council gathering in January, at which von der Leyen said Europe must now take the path of independence. Several diplomats briefed on the leaders' discussion described the summit as a Rubicon moment from which there was no turning back. So suddenly everyone realized, shit, we can't really count on the spoilers. We can't count anymore, really, on the Americans. Without GDP growth, we will be really vulnerable for external shocks, said Polish Finance Minister Andrzej Domanski. The Commission and other EU policymakers, he said, will have to focus on growth, focus on deregulation, and being more ambitious. Something that critics say has been too little, too slow. I take any. The problem is that translating that rhetoric into reality comes at huge political cost for leaders. Indeed, reforms to finalize the bloc fragmented single market or build up a true European deterrent capacity have been on the table for years, in some cases, decades. I'm just finishing the sentence. Leaders have long opted to politely ignore them because following through on the reforms would threaten national industries. And so, thank you for the resub, Tikanis. 1 year already. Oh, well, 6 months and 1 year consecutive. Thank you, thank you. Let's pull up your random quiz question. So today we are going to do question number 113. Up. Question 113. Scrolling. 113. All right. It's gonna be a question about Greece in a true or false. So let me pull up the poll function. Up. Okay, we'll have to shorten that. Nouveau sondage. Can I fit that? Yeah, okay, that will do. Okay, so first I'm reading you the question, then I launch the poll and you can answer in the poll. So, I read you the question. Question about Greece. True or false? The Greek civil servant Ioannis Economou, who works as a translator at the European Commission, has the world record of the most language known with 32 languages. Is that true or false? So I repeat, is it the Greek civil servant Ioannis Economou, who works as a translator at the European Commission, has the world record of the most language known with 32 languages. Is that true or is that false? You have, I would say, about 30 seconds still to vote. Let's see. Chat is divided. Do you think it's a world record to speak 32 languages? It was a blind guess. I can imagine there's gonna be a few blind guesses. Chat is split 50-50. True is leading. It's a trick question. He speaks only 31. Shit. Few more seconds. And okay, we have a tie. So chat is not certain whether it's true or false. It's false. It's false. I give you the story. So Ioannis Economou does speak 32 languages. And he is one of the most well-known living polyglots, but he does not have the world record. The holder of the record, according to the Guinness Book, is a guy named Ziad Fassa, who is supposed to talk, or sorry, he's supposed to know 58 languages. So Economou is one of the most famous polyglots, but he doesn't have the world record, which is, according to the Guinness Book, which there are debates on whether or not, etc., it's actually true or not, but that's what the Guinness Book is saying. Ziad Fassa has the record with 58 languages. But, well, even if he doesn't have the record, I think 32 languages is not so bad. You protest the question on the sondage doesn't speak. I did say orally. I did speak when I read the question. I did say world record. So the protestation is refused. In any case, I don't have enough character in the poll function to put the entire question. Out of curiosity, so chat, how many languages do you speak? Like, not necessarily bilingual, but like you're comfortable with. Your French or voice protest. Okay, that I will accept. So how many languages? Me, I'm extremely far from Ioannis. I barely speak 2 languages. 3 languages. 30 less than Emma. Still 2. 2 very well, 2 very bad. That's still 2 more than me. 300. So you have what? Hungarian, English, and what? Does Latin count? If you're comfortable enough in Latin, you're gonna count Latin if you want. German. I was going to suggest German. Okay, makes sense. Esperanto, non, Tikanis, tu bluffes. I don't believe the Esperanto. Like Esperanto is an urban legend. How many languages are required to be an MEP assistant? Technically by contract. I'm not certain now. I'm not sure. I don't think there's a requirement to speak a number of languages. That's for sure, no. Okay. To be an assistant, it's not required. After a certain level of certain salary, I think you are required to speak at least 2 languages. But no, it depends entirely of the of what the assistants, the MEP thinks is necessary. In practice, MEP assistants often speak at least 2 or 3 languages, sometimes more. Like you will have, of course, national language, English, quite a few times French, because it's very useful for the contact with the administration of the parliament, because you have a lot of French and Belgian in there, and then whatever other languages they have. But very minimum, like the very I don't think I've ever met an assistant that doesn't speak English. I don't think I've ever met one. So at the very least 2 in practice. Occitan is considered its own language? I do believe so, yeah. Especially since Occitan, I think it's not the same language root as French and other Latin language. Like Occitan, I think is a very... shit, no. Maybe I might be confusing with Basque. Yeah, no, I'm confusing with Basque. Basque is its very own language and completely different from other language of the area. Occitan is also its own language, but derived from Latin languages, if I recall correctly. Yeah, it's Latin language Occitan. Yeah, it's Basque that is not Latin based. You also want to survive in Belgium, or is it totally possible to speaking only English? It's possible. Like I've met a bunch of people in the EU bubble. They're living in Brussels. They don't speak French, or very weak French, because on a daily basis they are in the bubble. Everybody speaks English, and if they are, as they often are, in the part of Brussels that is very much like the expat part of town, like you go to a shop, many people will speak English. So in Brussels it's possible. Outside Brussels, or even like outside the area surrounding the bubble, that would not be possible. Like, don't go to Charleroi and think that you can function without French. You could go to Antwerp and function in English, but in Wallonia, no. Don't expect to go to Wallonia and function in only English. All right. Where was I? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, we were there. Yeah, in Flanders, it should be it's fine. It should be fine. In big cities, it should be fine. Not in Charleroi, even with French, it's... I mean, okay, Charleroi, they have a strong Belgian accent, but you can still understand. It's not that bad. Come on. I mean, you will struggle infinitely more with people from Quebec than with any Belgian coming from Wallonia, including Charleroi. Because like with the French Belgian, like it's okay. You may have some accent, and honestly, I've never seen like a broken accent where I'm like, what the fuck is that person saying in French? Average Québécois, I understand 60-70% of what they say. Not because of the accent, but because the vocabulary is completely different. Because like Québécois, so the French Canadian, basically it's a branch of French that went its own way. Like it broke off from the European French a long time ago, and it's actually much closer to old French. And so they have a bunch of words that are simply completely different, and also since culturally they had like a very strong resistance to English because of particularism in Quebec, like English words or English-like words that have been accepted in France, like in French from France, will use some English words as part of the common common language, everyday language. In Quebec, no. In Quebec, they will not use those English words, and they will stick to the French version. And that sounds like very weird to a French person to speak with a Québécois. Is Swiss French as bad as German Swiss? I mean, usually, I haven't spoken to a lot of like Swiss French, but like the stereotype is to say, okay, the Swiss French, they talk slowly. But I've never like from whatever conversation I had with French with Swiss French, no, it's fine. It's fine. Like I said, as far as French accent are concerned, like the toughest by far is the Québécois, like by far, because the language like it just fucked off its own way at some point, and did its own thing, and so they have completely different words than us on part of the language. But for the rest, like for continental French, like, it's fine. Like you will have okay some words here and there that might be different, like typically for numbers. So for instance, the French will say 70 to say 70. The Belgian and Swiss will say 70, which is historically the correct way. The Swiss will also say octante instead of 80 to say 80. So it's like, and you have like some very minor things like some expressions, some words that are going to be slightly different, but for everyday conversation, it absolutely has no impact whatsoever. Like I've been in Brussels like for 13 years now. Like there's two things. One thing I refuse to do. I refuse to say 70. That I refuse. I keep saying 70. The thing I do is when I'm on the phone, for instance, with the Belgian administration, I don't like. I'm not stupid. I'm not trolling them by saying 70 to let them know. Oh yes, I'm a French from France, and fuck you in your Belgium word. I would say 70. I will decompose the number. So I refuse to say 70. And the other way around, I have adopted an expression from here. So sorry for the English speakers, it won't make much sense. For the French, a bit more. So to say, can you do something in French? In France, you would say, est-ce que tu peux faire ça? Est-ce que tu peux faire? Do you have the capacity? Can you do this? In Belgian French, they will say, sais-tu faire ça? Which, when a French person will hear that for the first time, the way they will understand it is, do you have the knowledge to do this? And so, like, the very first time, like, it's very funny the first time when a French person, like, encounters this expression because you have a Belgian will ask, okay, can you do that? And the French will look at us, yeah, I know how to do that. Like, why are you asking me how, if I know how to do that thing? Yes, I know how to do that thing. Well, in fact, they're saying, can you do it? And so now, that's a habit I've taken. Like, I'm using both. I'm using peux-tu and sais-tu. I'm using both expressions. Tu sais le faire. Yeah, but it doesn't, like, savoir faire quelque chose is not necessarily natural in French. You can, sometimes, in some contexts, you can use it, but it's not like the go-to expression. Saying tu sais le faire, it implies more about, do you have the knowledge? Do you know how to do something? It's not, can you do this? Like, in the sense that, like, please do this for me. Maybe that's, okay, maybe I mistranslated. When I say can you, it's like, please do this for me. I often can't understand Swiss German. Yeah, it seems like a lot of German people tell me that they have issues with Swiss German. I've heard that before, yeah. So it's easier to speak English with them. Come to French, I feel like non-French French speaker can adapt to a more French way to speak if they see people struggling to understand them. Yeah, probably, because also probably they are more used to the fact that the French will like, what the fuck are you, like, how is it possible that you speak a different French than mine? Like, I'm French, I speak the pure French, there is no other French than me, than mine, let's say. France was heavily centralized, while Germany was very fragmented, so France had an easier way to impose a correct French. I mean, the way French became dominant in France is an interesting story. Basically, it's France killed off most regional languages with two things. Like until probably late 19th century, you still had very strong regional languages. Occitan, Breton, like all the regions had their own all regional languages and that people would use on top of French, but they would primarily talk in their regional languages. And so the French government then, at the end of the 19th century, did two things. First, they made school mandatory. School under a state teacher, no longer by the church. There was a separation of the church and the state, etc., etc. So from late 19th century and then beginning of 20th century, all kids had to go to school, and schools were managed by the state and had to follow a common program, and the program was in French. No longer, like, regional languages were not accepted in French schools from there, and so kids were taught in French. Second thing that the government did that finished killing off like the regional languages was mandatory conscription. So all the young people sent to the army, and like all around France, and the only language they had in common and that they had to interact with in was French. Like you would find yourself in a room with someone from Brittany, from Occitanie, from Alsace. The only language they could have in common was French, and so they had to speak French. And so this is how, for the most part, regional languages were killed off. And so today it's, even if there's a small resurgence of it, very few people speak regional languages. Like apart from some regions where you have like very strong particularism, like Brittany, Alsace, Corsica, and Occitanie, where you could have still the possibility to learn a bit the regional languages. The rest of the regional languages were just like exterminated. If we had one thing after 1890, you were not able to go to justice or any illegal stuff in other languages. Ah, okay, I didn't know that. Funny enough, like the Belgium had a similar thing, which fed into like the opposition between Wallonia and Flanders. I I forget which year. Like they for a very long time. So French, Wallonia was the dominant region in Belgium, and French was the dominant language. It was the language of aristocracy, of the leaders. Leaders were speaking French. Industries were speaking French, etc. It was the dominant language. And so you had a decree that was preventing Flemish from using Flemish as part of judicial procedures. And so you had cases where you had Flemish people who would end up in court, and the entire thing would be in French, and they would not understand. So they would be part of a legal case against them, and they would simply not understand anything. Like the judge would speak in French, all the procedure would be in French. They would not have a lawyer and whatever. So it was seen as a kind of persecution from the against the Flemish, and that was used later on as a one thing that fed the opposition between Flemish and Walloons. And at school they used violence. Violence was indeed that was indeed something indeed in the French school. Anyway, where were we talking about that? Ah yeah, because we had the question about languages. Okay, let's go back to the article because we still have a few to read. And then I'm running out of tea. It's terrible, and I'm dying. It's terrible. Sorry about that. Like I dream of the day where my cough will finally go away. Like I dream of it. I know it's gonna be 2 months, but yeah. That's weird because in school they teach you Occitan, but there was a change. Now, like you had reforms that now allow certain schools in regions where they still have the language to teach as an option. Like it's not part of the mandatory thing, but they you have the option to get a number of classes in your regional language. And so yeah, that's why I said that there was a bit of a resurgence of some regional languages because it's easier now to learn it at school. Hungary did the exact same to make Hungarian the dominant language, but now it's considered. Yeah, I mean that's. It is. I mean, let's talk it ourselves. That's how one language became dominant over all others. Is because like somehow that dominant language was imposed on the other, and the regional languages, the local languages, were killed off by one way or another. Let's not kid each other. That's how it worked. And indeed, like it's a form, like a cultural genocide might be a strong word, but indeed today that would not pass because it's culture erasure. Like you're saying, okay, your culture is not acceptable, and we're going to erase your cultural particularities, including your languages. But I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that you're saying that, and Droz, like I would expect that in most countries that would be, in many countries that would be the same. And also, like in quite a few cases, like the development of a national language is also a form of resistance against like an occupier. In the case of empires, etc., etc. So yeah, like, these three languages is very interesting politically, because you have plenty of processes that are linked to it on why one language emerged, became dominant or not dominant, etc. It's a very interesting topic. From a historical point of view. Where was I? Ah, voilà. So sorry, switching back from languages to EU economy. Let me just check something quickly. Does that work? Yay, that works. Okay. So take the proposals to form a European Capital Markets Union. The idea of joining up the EU fragmented capital markets to create a far vaster pool of investable capital was first pitched more than a decade ago, and has won endorsement from former European Central Bank President Mario Draghi as a crucial step towards independence. But it has gone nowhere for years due to the opposition from Berlin and Rome, among other capitals. I would say many capitals are against it, which have blocked the initiative due to the threat it poses to regional banks. Look at the Capital Markets Union, said the EPP Weber. The concept, the initiatives are on our tables for years now. The elephant in the room when leaders gather Thursday will be Europe's relationship with the Trump administration. Despite consensus around the need for Europe to plot its own path, several countries are unwilling to risk alienating Washington or seeing their companies prevented from selling into US markets due to protective EU policies. And the more you're trying to get independent from the US, the more Trump is going to be triggered and the more he's going to retaliate against you. So depending on your exposure to the US market or your dependency on other things, for instance on security, you don't necessarily want to trigger Trump on that. Relations between Brussels and Washington may well snap back to normal after the Greenland crisis, some diplomats suggest. That's very hard cope. That's like the cope level is like through the roof. Sure, things will go back to normal. The copium is there. But for some leaders, there is no turning back to the way things were before. As we left the worst of the Greenland crisis, there was a cowardly form of relief, Macron said. There are threats and intimidation, then all of a sudden Washington retreats and we think it's over. But don't think for one single second, every day there are new threats. Isn't that wishful thinking? That things will go back to normal with the US? My personal analysis is indeed that's pretty hardcore wishful thinking. And I think like more and more countries are coming around to realize that yeah, there's no coming back to normal. But yeah, it's always more comfortable to wish that things would go back to when things were easy than being forced to do things that will be hard and painful to do. In a way that's human, but yeah, at some point you have to look reality in the eyes. Any questions on that? Actually, do I have another article? Yeah, okay, let's I have another one linked to that. I don't know how to translate the politique de l'autruche. Politique de l'autruche. I mean, I think ostrich policy works in English. Playing the ostrich. I think that works in English. I think so. Let's check. Policy. Yep. It's yeah. Ostrich policy. That works. So France set to clash with Germany and Italy as EU leaders seek economic boost. Paris is facing a Berlin-Rome axis in a debate over how to revive the EU economy. From Eurobonds to European preference and the Mercosur trade deal, competing visions are set to collide when the bloc's 27 leaders meet on Thursday. Okay, the first is exactly the same thing. So on one side stands France, on the other, a newly aligned Germany and Italy. So indeed, like over the recent weeks, Germany and Italy have become like much closer to each other. And wanted to cooperate more, and so Germany leaving a bit aside the Franco-German relationship for many different reasons. It's not Macron is too weak, etc., etc. It's more. I mean, there is a part Macron is weak, but mostly because he's leaving. His mandate is over in a year, in a bit more than a year. He's politically very weak in France now. There's a lot of uncertainty on who is going to succeed after him. Political stability is still, and economic stability is not exactly a given in France, etc., etc. So Germany is kind of inclined, at least for the coming years, to potentially find another ally to push its policy at EU level. And Italy is a natural candidate, especially since, Meloni is pretty stable. She's likely to stay until the end of her mandate and potentially even after the next election. I think the next elections in Italy are 2028, I think so. Legislative elections, Italy. No, 2027. Okay, so it's also next year. But yeah, Meloni is at the moment incontested in the election, in the poll, so she's fairly solid. Okay, I thought it was 28. Okay, so Italy also 27. And also Italy has improved a bit its economic situation, which is ironic, I know, but still the case. And so yeah, you have this new Germany-Italy axis that is ironic to call that an axis, that is developing, and that is facing off with France, notably on the economic side, because, like I said, while there is an increasing realization that there is a need for more European independence, less reliance on the US, etc., etc., the intensity and the speed at which France would like to go is not really in the comfort zone of Germany, who is feeling much closer to Italy, that is friendlier to the US, and so, of course, the match is more natural there. So yeah. And I mean, you could also imagine like a Germany-Poland alliance, but Tusk is also weakened by the fact that Naoki, so the Polish president, is limiting the capacity of Tusk to do the policy that he wants. There's also historical difficulties between Germany and Poland, so Italy and Germany were more of a natural fit in the current context. So Paris made a last-minute move to join an informal pre-summit scheduled by Berlin and Rome ahead of the retreat on Thursday morning in an unusual bid to coordinate their position before leaders convene. The French intervention followed remarks on Tuesday from Emmanuel Macron to several European media outlets and amounts to an effort to assert Paris' agenda in response to a document circulated in recent days by Germany and Italy that lays out a sharply different vision for the EU economy. In doing so, the French president has flipped the script and introduced firmly on the table one of the most divisive matters for EU leaders: pooling debt to prop up the bloc. So that's what I was discussing before about the common debt. The timing is no coincidence either. Earlier this month, Mario Draghi called on the EU to work as a true union and urged leaders to implement a pragmatic federalist approach to survive in a new, more brutal world. The retreat in Aldenbissen, Belgium, comes a year and a half after a landmark report by Draghi warned of a bleak outlook for Europe's economy unless decisive steps were taken to boost competitiveness. I was going to say Draghi famously said after the presentation of his report that the EU had the choice between doing what his report was calling for or a slow agony. Since the report's publication in 2024, the global geoeconomic landscape has shifted dramatically with the US and China aggressive agendas adding pressure on the EU 27 countries. Macron is the most loyal to Draghi's ambitions, but also the weakest leader at home compared to Meloni and Merz. During the retreat, leaders will focus on strengthening the single market, reducing barriers to growth, and enhancing Europe's strategic autonomy, according to the agenda presented by the Chypriot EU presidency. Draghi, along with another former Italian Prime Minister, Enrico Letta, who published his own landmark report on the single market the same year, will attend parts of the discussions. Basically, they'll try to sell again the content of the report, say, okay, get in shape and do the fucking thing I say in my report, instead of bickering with each other. Reaching consensus, however, will be difficult. The EU's Franco-German engine appears to be sputtering, with Paris now facing a fresh Berlin-Rome alliance. On the 23rd of January, Germany and Italy agreed to coordinate their push to deregulate industry. The first flashpoint is expected to be Macron's call made Tuesday for issuing more common EU debt, Eurobonds, to finance the massive investment needed to lift competitiveness. Draghi's report in 2024 put those needs at between 750 billion euro and 1800 billion euro a year. And I think he said a few weeks ago that the 800 billion need for investment that was valid back in 2024 when he proposed the thing, today it would be even more because Trump is in power, etc., etc. So I say, yeah, now it's not even 800 billion, it would be probably much higher. We have three battles to fight: in security and defense, in green transition technologies, and in artificial intelligence and quantum technologies. In all of these areas, we invest far less than China and the United States, Macron said, adding, if the EU does nothing in the next 3 to 5 years, it will be swept out of these sectors. Berlin, however, has long resisted repeating the joint borrowing used to fund the 750 billion post-COVID recovery plan. Like I said, back when Germany accepted that, it was under the condition that it was a one-off. Like, we're not going to do that again. It's one. Just the one. And initially, they were like, yeah, sure, it's just the one time. And then afterwards, hey, you see, it works. Let's do it again. You want to do it again? Come on, you enjoyed it. You can do it again. Instead, Germany and Italy are expected on Thursday to call for expanded venture capital financing and stronger exit options for investors. The document circulated by Rome and Berlin suggests the creation of a pan-European stock exchange, a pan-European secondary market, and a review of capital requirements for lending without impending financial stability. That is a capital markets union, that. That sounds like capital markets union. Is it? Pan-European stock exchange? That sounds like akin to a capital markets union. On Eurobonds, Nordic countries have traditionally sided with Germany. Still, the same senior EU official noted that when the European Union needs to take those decisions, it has taken so, adding that joint borrowing remains an option after the blocs again turned to it at the end of 2025 to support Ukraine. There is no dream of European debt. There is European debt out in the market, and we've just increased it by 90 billion last December. In a letter sent to leaders on Monday, Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen did not mention joint borrowing, doubling down on cutting excessive regulations and integrating the 27-nation single market. In the run-up to, so basically reducing the inconsistencies and the over-regulation, so they want to deregulate even more, continue the omnibuses, etc., etc. In the run-up to a meeting with European industry leaders, so that was today, she also appealed to establish the so-called 28th regime to harmonize rules for companies operating across Europe. So that thing, like the 28th regime, so that's... Now they call that EU Inc. So it's... I haven't fully understood it, to be honest, and I need to dig further into it, but the idea is the following. So, okay, you're a company. European company, a startup. You get created in Germany. You're created under German law. You grow and you want to start expanding to sell to outside of Germany. You're growing fast, you want to expand and get on the EU market. Problem is that the company law in Germany is different in Germany compared to France, compared to Italy, compared to Lithuania, compared to all 27 countries. Each country has its own package of laws, company law, labor laws, taxation laws, etc., etc. So that means that once you want to grow outside your national markets, things become complicated because suddenly you have to multiply the amount of laws that you have to different laws that you have to respect as a company. And so there's an argument that it kills the growth of startups and small companies because it becomes too much for them to handle. Enters the idea of the 28th regime. The core idea of the 28th regime is to say, okay, we have the 27 different laws. What if we created a 28th regime, an EU regime, that companies could voluntarily use from the get-go? They create themselves under that 28th regime to basically say, okay, my aim is to be a pan-European company, and so I'm going to choose a pan-European regime, and so I will have simplified, some rules are going to be simplified, and I will be created under that regime that will allow me to work in all 27 member states under one single set of rules, that 28 regime. And so that way you don't have to deal anymore with the 27 different legislation because you're created under the 28th, that is the common one, and that would be valid everywhere. And so you would no longer have the problem with growth. It's kind of inspired by what Estonia did with its all digital kind of company creation system, etc., etc. You have lots of debate around that on okay, what would be the impact on labor law? Could that be used? Could that be used to circumvent national rules on taxation, on labor laws, etc., etc.? Should it be only accessible to startups or to all sorts of companies? So there's plenty of debates around the 28th regime, but that is one of the things that has come back again on the table to say, okay, how do we facilitate growth? Because ultimately, like in many dimensions, when it comes to economy, goulot d'étranglement in English, the choking point the choking point when you grow as a company is when you have to go outside your first member state, because that's where you will have 27 potentially different laws, and that's making things complicated for the law. You have 27 different financial markets. That means that you don't have as much money available as if you were a single market, so that facilitates American companies to buy you out or forcing you to go on the American market to get the funds. So there's a bunch of things on how do we facilitate the growth from a national company to a pan-European one. Except you're starting in Luxembourg. I don't even know. I mean, maybe that makes some things easier in some field, but not on everything. So yeah, the 28th regime it's one of the big question, the big topic of the moment. France is also pressing for a long-standing priority, a European preference, or Made in Europe policy that would favor EU content product in public procurement. It's defensive, but it's essential, because as we are facing unfair competition who no longer respects the rules of the WTO, Macron said on Tuesday. While the idea, so again, the idea of the European preference is to say, okay, in certain field, you give the priority to European company. The state has to buy, let's say, make a contract to buy something. I'm trying to think of an example. I was going to say a cable company. No, that doesn't work. But I mean, anything related to a strategic sector. They want to buy something. Today, everyone can compete. A French company, a German company, a Lithuanian company, an American company, a British company, a Chinese company. So pretty much everyone can compete, and the state, the public authority, choose the best offer, which may end up with a non-European company. European preference is to say, well, no. In this case, either you prevent non-European companies from competing altogether, so that market is now reserved only for European companies, or you must choose in priority European companies. You can choose non-European companies if they are no equivalent, etc., but your priority is to go for the Europeans as a way to give a boost to the European industry, to also potential to prevent non-European countries from having access to sensitive sectors, etc. So you have many different things like feeding into that idea of European preference. That is a very French idea historically. Where was I? While the idea has gained traction in EU capitals and at the European Commission, thanks to notably Trump, Nordic and Baltic countries, as well as the Netherlands, warned in a non-paper circulated ahead of the summit that the European preference risks wiping out our simplification efforts, hindering companies' access to world-leading technology, hampering exchange with other markets, and pushing investments away from the EU. So traditionally, you have the Nordic countries, the countries that are traditionally like more liberal, more free market kind of thinking. They are not big fans of the European preference because it's gaming the market in their view. Because instead of choosing the best offer, you artificially forced to choose an offer that might not be the best. But also, if you force companies or the state to choose European company over other non-European company, that means that you may deprive yourself from technologies, from services that might be better than what the Europeans are providing. And so you, instead of giving yourself the best tools to then do what you have to do, well, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot by doing with second-grade technology or second-grade service that otherwise you could get from outside Europe. There's also the question of what about the retaliation, because of course non-European countries are not going to be particularly thrilled that their companies are excluded from some key European markets, and so they might be tempted to then take retaliation against European companies, and so those countries who are very much in favor of exportation, etc., might be impacted by this. So you have a bunch of reasons why they are not necessarily so keen on that. Don't we have 28 set of rules for calls for tenders? All the member states and the rule for EU institution call for tender. And what about Norway, Switzerland? Can we buy from them? You do have some rules. You have some European directives on public tenders. And actually, there's a reform that is being made, and that's why we're also talking about the European preference, because the Commission is preparing that reform that could include, that most likely will include European preference, the debate being to what extent. And there's a debate on how do you define European preference. Is it only for EU member states? Is it EU member states plus EEA, so Norway, Switzerland, or even larger, the UK, Canada, the US, countries with a free trade agreement with the EU? So you have plenty of questions on how do you define European preference, or the Germans are even going instead for made with Europe instead of made in Europe, but we'll talk about that after. But we could argue that not investing in European defense industries is also giving up on the opportunity to catch up. It's not only it's not just defense. It's wider than that. I mean, you could make two arguments. You could make a perfectly valid argument on both sides. It's kind of chicken and the egg. Like, if you don't invest in your industries, they're not going to catch up on the competition. That's typically the French argument. The other side will tell you, well, A, you have a risk of retaliation. B, you might cut yourself from what is actually the best offer on the market. And so you're also kind of unfairly rewarding industries that are actually not up to par, because they assimilate that to a form of protectionism, which it is a form of protectionism. And one of the protectionism has some advantage, but one of the key drawbacks when you push protectionism far is that by cutting yourself completely from the real economy, from the real competition, you create an artificial world that is not viable outside of that world. Because, well, you're safe in your bubble, and so you're not incentivized to do better because you're not exposed to competition. And the second outside competition is introduced, the gap is ever increasing, and so the contact is even more brutal than it was before. To give you like a concrete example of like protectionism pushed far, you take the old version of the agriculture policy, the CAP. The original EU agriculture policy is full protectionism. Full protectionism to the point that whatever part of the French farmers were producing, the European farmers were producing, the state would buy. No matter the prices, no matter the demands or whatever, the state would buy it. Which created problems, because then you had prices that were completely disconnected from the reality because the state was always going to buy things, and you had a race towards overproduction because, well, if the state is always going to buy what you don't sell, well, just there's no reason not to produce. You always produce more because the state is going to buy it anyway. So that leads also to other kind of issues. Don't we have protectionism via standards, carbon impact? Yeah, but again, the idea of you always have two sides of a coin. You ask any non-European countries, they will tell you that the EU is probably one of the most protectionist area in the world. Because they say, yes, you use your standards, your environmental laws, etc. to actually prevent competition from entering your market and competing fairly. While the Europeans will say, oh no, but we do that because we want better quality things, and also the other are not respecting the rules, blah blah blah. So you're always going to have two different visions of that. I agree, but a middle ground could be found to be able to improve ourselves while getting access to better. I mean, that's the whole point. Like, what is the middle ground? For now, like, the battle around European preference is starting. Like, we know there's going to be European preference. The question is, how far will it go? And how do you define it? And that's what member states are currently fighting about, or at least setting the stage. You have the French pushing a maximalist option. You have the Germans, the Nordics, and the other, pretty much all the other, pushing the opposite maximalist position. Then the end result will be somewhere between the two, and that will be part of all the political discussion, etc. Like right now, we are in the opening bid. The French are pushing very far towards European preference protectionism. The other are pushing very far the other way because, again, it's a negotiating tactics. At the end, it will be somewhere in the middle. Question is it somewhere in the middle but more towards the French position, or more in the middle, more towards the German, Nordics, etc., etc.? That's going to be the end question. Where was I? Germany, meanwhile, circulated a document seen by Euronews in December as part of discussions among the 27, laying out strict conditions. Berlin wants the European preference to be time-limited, broadly defined, and applied only to a narrow list of products. It also favors a made-with-Europe approach, open to countries with EU free trade agreement and other like-minded partners. So like I said, it's the maximalist approach to the opposite of France. France wants purely European preference, only EU countries, all sectors concerned, etc. The Germans are saying, oh well, we only do that for the most important sectors for a limited amount of time, and actually by European we mean pretty much everyone we like, even outside of Europe. Which is then killing kind of the idea of a European preference, but again, like it's the opening bid, you have two maximalist positions opposing each other. I really don't get the Germany's point of view, it seems very naive. I understand that many would think France is overdoing, but I mean, the German point of view and on this, the French position is, I would say, probably the most isolated. Most likely, most countries are closer to the German position than to the French position. The German thinking is the following. Germans have an economy that is even more built towards industrial exports than other EU countries. Like, the European economy is in general an export economy. That's why we do free trade agreements, etc. Because our economy, the EU economy, is built for exportations. That's the way the European economies are made. We are an exportation economy. The Germans, even more so. So they need access to the other markets. Meaning that, like I said, when you do protectionist policies, for instance, European preference, where you're going to piss off your trade partners, who may then say, oh, well, okay, so the Europeans are saying that my companies are not welcome on their markets anymore. Well, then I'm going to also forbid European companies from competing or from accessing my markets. And so the German companies that rely even more than average on access to foreign markets will be particularly impacted. Second thing, the Germans are very active in industrial production, and particularly very complicated, very complicated, all industry is complicated, but certain subsector of industry that have extremely international supply chains. Typically, automobile industry, plane industry, that sort of thing. Your supply chain is international. The company is based in Germany, the factory is in Germany, but you're using parts from all over the world. And so if you have something that says, okay, it's European preference, or we restrict the access to things that are not fully made in Europe, etc., then your companies are either excluded from a number of markets because they will have too many non-European components, or they will be forced to redo their supply chains to remove all the non-European things, which is going to be extremely complicated, extremely costly for them. So again, they're gonna be losing. They're going to be losing about in that sense. That's how if you have to understand the German position, because they are heavily export economy with very internationally integrated supply chains. That's why they push for something with the Made with Europe approach, saying, okay, we need to do something a bit preferential, but let's expand it to people that the EU is friends with, that we have a free trade agreement with, that we have a special agreement with, etc. Because then those countries tends to be the ones that we trade with, and that potentially we have already integrated in our supply chains, and so it's not going to impact too much our own thing. That's the reasoning of the Germans there. The French, like, the Germans think in terms of economy and industry. The French think in terms of strategy. Ultimately, that's that. Where was I? Italy, the EU's third largest economy, has sided with Germany. Both countries say the priority is not only to support European businesses, but also to attract new business from outside the EU, according to their document to other capitals. Macron appeared to partially align with that view on Tuesday, saying the European preference should focus on limited sectors such as clean tech, chemicals, steel, automotive, or defense. Otherwise, Europeans will be swept away, he said. So, Macron is to be fair, that was already a given. That it's not going to be European preference on every single sector. That was never going to fly. Like, European preference was always going to be on a limited amount of sector, most likely the most strategic one, the most sensitive one. France initially made an opening bid that was like everything must be European preference. Well, they already started to move to say, okay, yeah, it's going to be only strategic sectors. They made a step, then we'll see, they'll see if the other are making a step as well. At the retreat, Berlin and Rome are also set to push a deregulatory agenda. As the European Commission rolled out several simplification packages in 2025, the two countries are calling for further withdrawal and simplifications of EU initiatives across the board. Alright, see you later, Tenvan. Have a nice evening. They also propose an emergency break allowing intervention if legislation raised serious concerns regarding additional administrative burden, both on enterprise and on national authorities, which was like the thing that we already discussed, and they want basically to reintroduce a right of veto in areas that were until now covered by majority rule. Last but not least, the Mercosur trade agreement looms large. During the retreat, the Commission plans to consult EU countries on its provisional implementation after a judicial review triggered by the European Parliament suspending ratification of the deal signed with Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. France remains firmly opposed to the Mercosur agreement, citing farmers' fear of unfair competition from Latin American imports. Yeah, Latin American. But the deal nonetheless won backing from a majority of member states in January after Italy gave its support. Berlin and Rome leave little room for doubt in their document. We call for an ambitious EU trade policy taking full account of the potential and needs of all economic sectors, including agriculture. The finalization of the EU-Mercosur agreement was an important step in that direction. So again, like full on trade to compensate the fact that the Americans are going their own way. Let's say it like that. Let me just remove a few notifications. I don't need this. Thank you very much. There we go. Sorry about that. Any questions on that? How long have we been streaming already? Oof. Almost 2 hours. Okay. I will have to choose strategically. I will read 2 more articles. Okay, I will read this one. And then we'll go to Ukraine. So we stay on the European preference. So you understand European preference. France is pushing for one vision that is opposed by Germany, now allied to Italy, but also a lot of other countries. And that is going to be like one of the main big fights on how we are going to shape the upcoming strategic economic discussions. And so that was member states, and von der Leyen, which stands in the middle, started to say a few things about that. So European preference is necessary, but a fine line to walk, warned von der Leyen. The debate on Made in Europe will be at the center of the discussion that EU leaders will have during an informal summit on Thursday. Establishing a Made in Europe preference in public contract is a fine line to walk, Ursula von der Leyen has warned on the eve of an informal summit of European Union leaders, where the divisive topic is said to be firmly on the table. I believe that in strategic sectors, European preference is a necessary instrument that will contribute to strengthen Europe's own production base. It can help create lead markets in those sectors and support the scaling up of European production capabilities, the President of the Commission said in Strasbourg on Wednesday evening. So there, she's kind of repeating the French idea. She said, okay, the approach pushed by the French historically to say, okay, we in strategic sector, in number of sectors, defense, new tech, etc., we have to catch up. We have to build up our own capabilities, and so the European preference is a way to boost that, to give them guarantee, to give our industry visibility by telling them, okay, invest in your production capacity, in new products, etc. We will guarantee you markets. And so they don't have to tell themselves, oh shit, I'm investing in a new factory, but actually, will I be able to sell what I'm producing? European preference is a way to say, okay, you can go ahead. You kind of have a market that is reserved for you. Up. But I want to be clear. It is a fine line to walk, she added. There is no one-size-fits-all. That is why every proposal must be underpinned by robust economic analysis and be in line with our international obligations. So basically, okay, on principle, the French are right, but we can't go like all in on that because, okay, maybe in some economic sectors we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot, or that could go against our commitment, so we could piss off our friends, or even break a few treaties. Von der Leyen's cautious endorsement of Made in Europe reflects the controversial nature of the concept, which has become increasingly prominent in the EU political debate amid economic stagnation, punitive US tariff, and aggressive Chinese trade practices. Because the reason for the debate around European preference, it's a combination of, so in the order of the article, the American tariff, Trump being Trump, he puts tariff on everything, and so you're losing markets, and you have like hostile behaviors from the US. So, okay, how do we counter that? By reserving part of our markets to our companies. That way, what they can't get outside of Europe, in the US notably, they can get at home. And also, we're kind of pushing back against the dependencies that we have with the US in key sectors. So first factor, the US. Second factor, the Chinese. Chinese, they pose a different issue. That is that they have very aggressive trade practice, not because they're putting tariff, but because they subsidize heavily their own industry, illegally, but they subsidize it heavily, so they give public money to their companies, so that then they can lower their prices below what would normally be sustainable for them. And that way, they can their products can compete at prices that European companies can't compete with. Because again, since they're receiving subsidies from the state, their cost of production is de facto lower. The state is taking a kind of the difference between what is the real cost of producing and the sale price that they can afford. And so you are more facing unfair trade practices that is killing off then European competition. And so by making European preference, you're saying, okay, we're going to keep out the Chinese from certain markets. That way, our industry in this sector is protected. We're also helping them catching up to the Chinese in some sectors, typically on electric cars, that sort of thing. Like the Chinese have a very clear edge now, and so it helps the European companies compensate. And also, like, you have a strategic aspect in the sense that you don't want Chinese companies in particularly sensitive sectors related to defense, strategic communication, that sort of thing. You don't necessarily want the Chinese in there. And so giving the contracts to Europeans is a way to safeguard the strategic interest of Europeans as well. And I had a third one, US, China. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I feel I'm forgetting one, but yeah. Then it's a question of defense, more specifically, because we need to catch up on lack of investments, etc. And so European preference, like I said before, is giving the guarantee to the industry that invest massively, build new factories and everything. We're reserving markets for you, and so you're certain that your investment will not be for nothing. And so then you can catch up on all the years that you didn't invest in. The surge in public spending across the bloc over the last year with a 150 billion program, so that's the SAFE program, to boost defense spending, and a 90 billion loan to support Ukraine have fueled worries that foreign companies rather than domestic ones would reap the benefits. French president, there it's the idea, okay, we put EU money on the table, it would be nice if the EU money goes to European companies. We're not borrowing money to finance non-European companies, if we simplify. French President Emmanuel Macron has long been the most ardent supporter behind the inbuilt preference, also known as Buy European. Speaking to several newspapers ahead of Thursday's summit, Macron said the clause was a defensive measure against those who no longer respect trade rules. We must protect our industry. The Chinese do it, and so do the Americans. Europe is currently the most open market in the world, which is true. Faced with this, the solution isn't to be protectionist, but to be consistent. Meaning not to impose rules on our producers that we don't impose on non-European importers, Macron said. There's a slight message on Mercosur hidden in there as well, because France is opposing Mercosur because they say it's going to be unfair competition between South American farmers and European farmers, because they have we are giving rules to European farmers that South American farmers don't have to respect. We won't apply European preference to mobile phones. We no longer produce them in Europe. We must focus on certain strategic sectors such as clean tech, chemicals, steel, automotive, and defense. Otherwise, Europeans will be left behind. Kind of saying, okay, there are some sectors where we are already a lost cause. We lost the war, no need to shoot ourselves in the foot by giving priority to products that don't exist. But there are some that are either hyper-strategic or where we still have a chance to fight. And so those are the ones that we need to focus on. Mario Draghi, the former president of the European Central Bank, who authored a highly influential report on competitiveness and is set to attend Thursday's summit, has also backed the European preference, albeit in a targeted manner. By contrast, the French pitch has been met with strong resistance from the Netherlands, the Nordics, and the Baltics, who argued the European preference would increase regulatory burdens, close down markets, and scare investors away. The basic idea of trying to protect European businesses, if that is the purpose of Buy European, to try to avoid trading with or partnering with other countries, then I'm very skeptical, Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson told the Financial Times ahead of the summit. We need to be able to compete because of quality and because of innovation, not because we try to protect the European market, he added. We do not want to protect European businesses that are basically not competitive. There's also, like in this discussion, like something that is linked to big countries versus small countries. Like smaller countries tend to be not in favor of the European preference. Why? For the same reason that they are against easing up the rules on state aid. Because their fear is that if European preference or easier state aid are a mean to give an advantage to the biggest European companies, that is not a race that the companies of small European countries can win. The reasoning is like, okay, basically that's going to be something that will only benefit the French, the Germans, maybe a bit the Italians, the big countries. Particularly if you combine that with a state aid. Why? Because the size of the budget of Sweden is not the same as the size of the budget of Germany or France. So if you start saying, well, we are reserving some markets to only European companies, and at the same time, you say, well, companies can receive more easily state subsidies, the ones that are going to win are the big countries, because if you go into a race on who is going to put the most money in their companies, there's no world in which you can beat the French and the Germans, because they are simply the bigger countries. So the amount of money that Sweden could give to Swedish companies would be nothing compared to what the Germans and the French would do. And so automatically, the French and the German company would crush the Swedish companies, and basically you're killing off the national champions that might have had like good products, but can't compete with the subsidies of the bigger countries, etc., etc., etc. That's why the small countries tend to be against European preference, free state aid rules, etc., etc., because they see that as basically the big countries will rule over us and destroy our own national industries, and also it creates an artificial situation where our companies were maybe doing good quality products, but that doesn't amount to anything because it's the big guys that have more money, bigger public market that they can give to their companies, and so our companies will be crushed. That's the reasoning why the smaller countries tend to not be fans of that. And to an extent, you had kind of that theory being verified during COVID. During COVID, on the state aid part. During COVID, so in principle, the EU has rules in competition law that say, okay, member states cannot throw money at their companies for nothing. You can't you have to respect competition rules. During COVID, because it was COVID, the economies were going to shit, the Commission said, okay, temporarily, I'm going to suspend the rules on state aid. Meaning that you can put as much money as you want, throw as much money as you want in your economy, just notify me, but I'm going to say, okay, because it's COVID, economy is going to shit, it needs to be supported by the state, and so you do what you need to do, you just let me know the money that you spend on your company. And so that suspension of rules lasted like for a couple of years, if I recall correctly. And towards the end of the period, the figures were quite telling, in the sense that out of all the state aid, so the money that every single government in Europe threw at their economy, threw at their companies as state aid, I think it was almost 75%. That was just two countries, France and Germany. And saying 75%, I'm not even. I'm even wondering if it's not higher than that. Let's see. Commission. I have the stats somewhere. I know. Yeah, okay. I had the figures. So, the top 3 countries during COVID that threw money was Germany, that represented a bit less than 50% of all the money thrown at the economy. France, with a bit less than 25%, and then Italy at a bit less than 8%. All the rest was the other 24 EU countries. So that the experience of COVID kind of shows that the fear of the smaller countries, that if you go into a free-for-all in terms of state aid, that's something that is going to basically be only for the French and the Germans. The other are going to be crushed because they don't have the money to throw at that. Anyway, where was I? No company, okay. Meanwhile, Germany is advocating what it calls Made with Europe, a wider concept to cover like-minded partners and countries that have signed trade deals with the bloc. Thursday's summit at the Aldenbisten Castle in eastern Belgium has been designed as an informal retreat, allowing leaders to have a free-flowing conversation. There will be no written conclusions, no formal decisions taken. The European preference will be high on the agenda, said a senior EU official. What we have seen talking to leaders is that more and more, perhaps all of them, are ready to have a debate on this. Perhaps the equilibrium is not the same. Some don't want the European preference to be applied across the board, the official said. But it's an important debate to be had. A few years ago, it would not have had the same level of consensus. So, like I said, the general principle of European preference, most countries now are accepting it. The question is what you put behind the word European preference. And that's where you have the gambit between the fight between France on one end, Germany / Italy / the Nordics / everyone else on the other. Do we have questions about this before I move on to my final topics where we're going to talk about Ukraine? Completely different topic. I give you a few sec. I'm just checking something. All right. That can close. Sorry, I have notifications left, right, and center. I need to clean. All right. Let's go through our final article. So Ukraine, you may have heard of the country. It's somewhere east of Europe. Apparently there's stuff happening there like for the past 4 years. Apparently. And the country wants to join the EU. Silly that they are. Who in their right mind would want to join Europe? Seriously. Anyway, they want to join. And so this week, Politico published an article where they're basically saying, oh, well, it would be possible to get Ukraine to join the EU in 2027, so next year. This article created a lot of discussions, with notably our dear friend Viktor Orban saying that it's a scandal, it's a declaration of war to Hungary, etc., etc. So we're going to go read this article and discuss whether there is a universe in which Ukraine could join the EU in 2027. So 5 steps to get Ukraine into the EU in 2027. Plans to bring Kyiv into the tent before it has completed all reforms and to remove Hungary's veto signal a sense of urgency in Brussels. So first, a reminder. How does it work? Not magnets, but joining the EU. To join the EU, you must first be recognized as a candidate country. So the Commission, member states say, okay, we think you could potentially join us. You could be part of the cool kids. And then there is a long process, where the country that is a candidate must work to achieve a set of 3 conditions. Condition number 1, political condition, being a democracy. democracy, respecting the rule of law, etc., etc. Independent judiciary, that sort of thing. Second condition, an economic one. You need to have an economy that is solid enough to bear the pressure of the single market, because the single market is very useful to join the single market, but that also means that suddenly you find yourself in competition with companies from all around Europe, and so you need to have an economy that is solid enough to sustain that kind of pressure. And third condition, you kind of need to catch up. Europe didn't started yesterday. It started like 70 years ago. There's a bunch of laws that have been adopted in 70 years. You need to catch up. So you need to adapt in your law all the laws that have been adopted by the EU until now. And once you respect these three technical conditions, the Commission says, congratulations, you fulfilled the condition, and then the countries need to say yes or no, and there is the adhesion process, the validation process. In a normal world, that process of adhering to the EU takes a long time. Long time. The fastest process of adhesion in the EU lasted 2-3 years, and that was Finland. Most of the Eastern European countries negotiated for about a decade before being able to join the EU. Countries in the Balkans, who are still candidates, they're not like in the EU yet, and they still have some work to do. They've been negotiating for 15, sometime more years to join the EU. So the idea that Ukraine could potentially join in 2027, so in a year, is kind of an ambitious timeline. Let's say it like that. Also, depending things are already available in your language. Well, you have the translation to do as well. Yeah. I mean, yeah, okay. You always have a thing with language. That's on par with things for sure. So yeah, all that to say, saying yeah, Ukraine will join next year. That is a very ambitious timeline. Longest negotiation time is what, Turkey? Probably Turkey, yes. I mean, Turkey is a bit special because it depends on how you count the negotiation time. Because Turkey has been a candidate like for... They submitted their candidacy like ages ago. Like really long time ago. Like I think the first time they did it was like 89. Like the moment when they submitted their candidacy. Attends, let's see. Turkey EU candidacy. I think it's 89 or something like this. Ah no, I'm wrong by 10 years. They became an official candidate in 1999. But I think they make their request before that. Voilà. Okay. I was kind of right. They applied to join in 87. And they got recognized as a candidate in 99. So, negotiations started afterwards. Officially from 2005. But then they were frozen again. They were frozen in 2018. Something like that. So it depends because of the rule of law issues with Erdogan, etc., etc. So Turkey, technically, the longest candidate. Then the exact number of years depend on how you count. Sometimes candidates change their mind, so if it takes too long, there's a... Yeah, that's kind of the difficult equation that the Europeans are at the moment. Because on the one hand, there is a reason why joining the EU takes a long time. Because it's a complicated process. You have tons of conditions to fulfill that exist for a good reason. So it takes time. On the other hand, if you take too long, well, at some point the other country will be like, well, either you want me or you don't want me. And if you don't want me, the Russians, the Chinese are very happy to make deals with me. So there's also a pressure, oh shit, we need to also make sure that, yeah, we want you, don't go see the Chinese, don't go see the Russians, stay with us. So there's kind of this difficult balance that the EU is trying to maintain when it comes to EU accession. If Ukraine joins, what about Moldova? Moldova currently has this candidacy that is binded to Ukraine. So they applied together to join the EU, and so both their files are linked. So in theory, as of today, Ukraine and Moldova advance together, meaning that they would join together the EU. That's the current situation, but then you have this article, and that would put Ukraine in a separate box. And the euro is not negotiable. Yes, the euro is not negotiable as an objective. It doesn't mean that you get the euro as a currency from the moment you join the EU, but yeah, you commit, when you join the EU, you commit that you will do the necessary to then join the Eurozone in time. The only ones that have like a full opt-out, like they're not concerned at all by the euro, are the Danish. Danish and kind of the Swedish, but Swedish is kind of a weird thing. Technically, they're supposed to join the euro. In practice, they're not because there was a referendum, so it's kind of a gray area. Let's say it like that. All right, so let's start the article. Let me go back to my main page. There we go. The EU is hatching an unprecedented plan that could give Ukraine partial membership in the bloc as early as next year, as Brussels tries to shore up the country's position in Europe and away from Moscow, according to 10 officials and diplomats. 4 years on from Russia's full-scale invasion, and with Kyiv pushing for EU membership in 2027 to be included in a peace deal with the Kremlin, so Ukraine is saying, okay, if I sign peace with Russia, I want in the deal with Russia the guarantee that I will join the EU in 2027, which is kind of insane because then you're making a deal with a country that is not part of the EU, that the other country will join the EU that is not part of the treaty at a date independently from whether or not the EU judged that they are ready. It's kind of an insane process. There, or the Ukraine puts that in there because they say, okay, we can't join NATO because the other don't want, so as an alternative, we need to be guaranteed that we would join the EU because the EU is the closest thing to a security guarantee. So they want to make sure that they would join the EU right after the war with Russia. But it's kind of a very weird kind of request because you would kind of be saying, okay, well, Europe, you don't have a choice. You have to take Ukraine right now. We're not giving you a choice, which is very weird. And I don't even know if legally that would be possible. The early stage ID would represent a dramatic change to the way the bloc brings new countries into the fold. The plan would see Ukraine getting a seat at the EU table before carrying out the reforms needed for full membership privileges. So before you ticked all the boxes to be able to join the EU. European officials and Ukraine government say Kyiv membership bid is urgent. Russia is likely to stop our movements into the EU, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky told reporters in Kyiv on Friday when asked about the importance of formalizing a 2027 accession date. Which is debatable. The Russians are, it's debatable. Ironically, the whole conflict around Ukraine started from Ukraine wanting to get closer to the EU. But since, like in the latest year, now Putin is not debating the Ukraine joining the EU. Like, they don't want Ukraine joining NATO, but Ukraine joining the EU, they're like, yeah, okay, sure, why not? So they're it's not as clear-cut as that anymore. That is why we say name the date. Why a specific date? Because the date will be signed by Ukraine, Europe, the USA, and Russia. Again, assuming that the treaty is signed by all these four and not just Russia, Ukraine, and the US. Because for now, Europe does not have a seat at the table. Not Ukraine, the remaining part of... Well, technically still Ukraine. You could create... depending on how the deal is written, you could do a thing like Cyprus. Cyprus is cut in half, with the northern part occupied by Turkey. The EU does not recognize, like no country in the world apart from Turkey, recognizes the northern part of Cyprus as an independent country. So the EU considers that northern entity, the Northern Republic of Cyprus, doesn't exist. They say the entirety of Cyprus, of the island of Cyprus, is part of the EU. But we create kind of a special regime because there is a situation on the ground. But on paper, they say now the entire island is part of the EU. Legally speaking. This is a whole thing. Like, you have a whole thing about Cyprus because initially, the EU did not wanted Cyprus to join while it was divided. Initially, the deal with Cyprus was, okay, we want you to join the EU, but you will join the EU on the condition that you have a reunification. And Cyprus was like, okay, let's go for it. And so they were negotiating with the Northern Republic of Cyprus for a reunification. And so the negotiation with Cyprus, between the EU and Cyprus, were done in the idea that Cyprus would join as a reunited island. And towards the end of the process, there was a deal. There was a deal for a reunification that was found between the Republic of Cyprus and the northern part of Cyprus. There was a deal that was done. And so the EU was like, great, that's done. You can join the EU, you did it, you have concluded a deal, Cyprus will be reunited, so go ahead. Problem is that when that deal had to be ratified, validated, you had to have a referendum, and the Greek Cypriots, so the southern part of Cyprus, rejected the agreement, which was definitely not anticipated. And so the EU found itself kind of stuck because they had done the negotiation with Cyprus with the idea that the island would be reunited. There was a deal, and at the last moment that deal collapsed. And so the EU was like, shit, okay, well, I guess you're joining as a divided island. We're going to do like something kind of weird to make it work, but okay. But initially, like, the EU did not want Cyprus to join divided. Ireland is not unified. That's completely different thing. Ireland, like the Northern Ireland, there's a treaty in place. Like nobody's denying that Northern Ireland is part of the UK. You have a movement that wants the reunification of Ireland, and so that Northern Ireland would no longer be part of the UK. But from a legal point of view, there's no denial today that Northern Ireland is part of the UK. So that's completely like there's no question of Ireland being in the same box as Cyprus and Ukraine. Like it's not the same universe. Where was I? I was somewhere. I don't know where. There. The EU's ID echoes Emmanuel Macron's multi-speed Europe blueprint, which he has outlined several times since he became French president in 2017. The latest version has been informally dubbed reverse enlargement according to an EU official and 2 European diplomats, because it effectively brings countries into the bloc at the beginning of the process of meeting membership criteria rather than at the end. So today, like I said, to join the EU, you tick all the boxes, and once you tick all the boxes, and you get accepted and everything, congratulations, you're a member of the EU, you join the entire package of the EU. But first, you have to tick all the boxes, one by one. The idea of Macron and others when it comes to, it's more than multi-speed Europe, it's more on the idea. Multi-speed Europe is another thing, but the idea of concentric circles of the EU is to say, okay, given that we also have a pressure to accelerate the adhesion process, because otherwise other countries get frustrated and then they go away and potentially get closer to China, to Russia, and that's not in the EU interest. Instead of making them wait 5, 10, 15, 20 years of negotiation, and that they enter like as a block in the entire thing, what if we make them enter bit by bit? Meaning that the idea is that instead of, okay, you have a whole bunch of boxes to tick, and you can only enter when every single box has been ticked. Instead, you will say, okay, each box ticked gives you access to one part of the EU immediately. So you do all the boxes that allow you to join the single market. Congratulations, you can join the EU single market. You don't right now. You don't have to wait for all the other boxes. You tick the boxes for single market, you join the single market. You join the boxes for customs union, you join the customs union, etc., etc. So you cut in pieces the parts, the EU membership, the perks of joining the EU, and you say, okay, you inside say, okay, tick all the boxes, and you get part of the EU, bit by bit. And so, in a way, you give a benefit to the EU country, because you say, okay, even if the entire process will still take like 10 years, 15 years, the other country will not have the frustration of, I have nothing for 15 years and then I can join. They will get small pieces of Europe every so often. With reduced rights, etc., etc., etc. Then you have the questions of what are the fundamentals that you have to respect in any case? And probably the question of rule of law, democracy would be like a sine qua non condition. But that's kind of the idea. So, okay, you join bit by bit, small bit by small bit. That way, you don't have to wait for a very long time. Hence, the reverse enlargement. EU officials said the idea is attractive because it would give Kiev breathing space to finish reforms to its democratic institutions, judiciary, and political systems, while lessening the likelihood it abandons hope of ever joining the bloc and turn its back on the West. However, obstacles lie ahead, not least Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, who opposes Ukraine's membership. Based on conversation with 5 diplomats representing different countries and 3 EU and 2 Ukrainian officials, speaking on condition of anonymity, Politico has identified 5 steps. Step 1. Get Ukraine ready. The EU has been front-loading Ukraine's membership bid. That involves providing Kyiv with informal guidance in negotiating clusters, the legal steps on the path to membership. In the sense that the EU is giving a lot of help to Ukraine so it can speed up the preparation to join. Like I say, they say basically, okay, you're not there, like we're not officially negotiating that part of the adhesion yet, but here's a bunch of information of guidance on what you should do so that you can already prepare everything so that the day we reach that part of the negotiation, you already have done everything. We'd say, oh, perfect, moving on immediately. And so the negotiation gets faster because we gave you all the information you need to basically make the actual thing a box-ticking exercise. The bloc has already provided Ukraine with details on 3 of 6 negotiating clusters. Now, the negotiating clusters are, like I said, the ticking box exercise, and they are cut in pieces, bits of negotiations that are called clusters, and there are traditionally 6 clusters of negotiation. At an informal meeting of European Affairs Minister in Cyprus in March, the EU wants to give a visiting Ukrainian delegation details of more clusters so work can begin on those as well. Despite the most challenging circumstances, in the midst of ongoing Russian aggression, Ukraine is accelerating its reform efforts, Marilena Rauna, Deputy Europe Minister of Cyprus, which holds the presidency of the Council of the EU, told Politico. The March 3rd meeting will target reaffirming that support, she said. But there will be no shortcuts on reforms, an EU official said. That message was echoed by 2 senior diplomats from countries that are strong backers of Ukraine and all the EU officials Politico spoke with. Still online? Well, it's not that long, like 2 hours and a half. Usually, usually when the streams in English are around 2 hours to 2 hours and a half. Like this one is gonna be slightly longer because we're discussing things, so I guess we'll do a 3-hour stream, which is arguably long for an English stream, but 2 hours and a half, I think that's fairly classic for an English stream. It took 10 years to do 10 member states. 1 member state can be done. Well, it's not it took 10 years to do 10 member states. 10 member states negotiated for 10 years. Some were a bit faster than others, like some finished the process in 8 years, etc. But like it's not. You take 10 years, you divide by 1 member, so 1 member can be done in 1 year. No, that's not how it works. Like, if you do things properly, I very much doubt that Ukraine can be ready in 1 year on the technical side of things. Like, I don't believe it. Like, I've said it multiple times. In normal circumstances, Ukraine adhesion takes 10, 15 years. Uh, 1 year, that's insane. That's just insane to think of even being able to do it in 1 year with a country that is still at war, that has massive issues in many different areas. That's simply not possible. Like, if even a country like Finland, it took them 2-3 years of negotiations, there's not a universe in which you do it properly in 1 year for Ukraine. Like, that's simply not possible. If you do not want to cut corners everywhere. No enlargement without reinforcement. Oh, I mean, then you have the other part of the conversation. Then is the EU itself ready to incorporate a member like Ukraine? That's another discussion, which is very necessary. But yeah, and I would tend to agree with you personally. But that's why, like, the idea of Ukraine joining in 2027, for me, like, that's just a big joke. That's a joke. It cannot be anything else than a joke. And if you were to do it, in any case, that would probably be in the interest of Russia to do that. Because you would create so many problems within the EU that then basically the EU is neutralized for 10 years. And so Russia can do whatever it wants for 10 years. So for me, it's like rushing at all costs to do everything in 1 year. It's impossible. And if you force it, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Can we put them on the Norway plus Switzerland package? Well, given that Norway and Switzerland are not candidate countries, I mean, if you want Ukraine to never join, yes, that can be an option, but Norway and Switzerland are not candidate countries. So that solves that, let's say, like this. So you're saying that there will be no shortcuts? Sure. Norway could any moment. I mean, Norway did vote twice against it, so... And I think they officially withdrew their candidature after the second referendum against it. Let's continue. So yeah, there will be no shortcuts on reforms, an EU official said. That message was echoed by 2 senior diplomats from countries that are strong backers of Ukraine and all the EU officials Politico spoke with. EU membership only brings benefit if you go through the transformation via the enlargement process. That's the real superpower of EU membership, one official said. The European Commission has to square those two things. The need to move quickly, but also to have the reforms in Ukraine. Yes, they did, but every government since have said it would be cool, similar to Iceland. I mean, lately there's been a bit of a resurgence of debates in Norway and Iceland on EU membership. Norway, I don't buy it. Iceland could be. I think there was like a commitment in the new government in Iceland of making a referendum on whether or not to relaunch the process with the EU. I think there's that process in Iceland, but Norway, I don't see that happening. At least at the moment. And probably, like in the case of Norway, if suddenly the government say, okay, we're gonna restart the negotiation with the EU, probably the EU would say, okay, well, do a referendum first, because you did us like you did you did us the trick twice, where we negotiated with you, and then at the last moment say, yeah, no, I can't. So first you do your referendum to make sure that you want to join the EU, and then we'll see. J'ai l'impression qu'on n'est jamais aligné avec l'UE alors qu'on a un président pro-européen. I mean, depends what you put behind line with the EU. You can be pro-European and have a very different view of what the EU is. That's the principle. Ah, you are meaning Ukraine joined the EEA? Ah! Well, or I don't know. EEA is also a European Economic Area. It's a different thing. It's a different organization. So it's not the Commission that decides who is part of the EEA or not. It's the EEA that decides who is part of them. The question is, and I'm not familiar with the rules to join the EEA. It's mostly an economic thing. It's an economic area. I don't think Ukraine is interested only in EEA. They want other things. So I don't like if you gave the option of Ukraine, you can join the EEA instead, they would say no. I think they want the EU, and that's it. Where was I? So for its part, Kyiv said it's ready to do the work required. We will be technically ready by 2027, Zelensky said on Friday. You are talking about the end of the war and simultaneous security guarantees. And the EU, for us, is security guarantees, so that's why the Ukrainians are insisting on joining the EU, because they know they can't get NATO, so EU is second best. Step 2. Create EU membership light. EU government questioned Commission President Ursula von der Leyen about efforts to break the deadlock of bringing new nations into the bloc at a meeting in Brussels on Friday, according to diplomats who took part in the discussions or were briefed on the content. She set out a variety of options and models that the EU is considering, they said. Among them was the idea of reverse enlargement, that we discussed just before. It would be a sort of recalibration of the process. You join and then you get phased in rights and obligations, said the EU official familiar with the content of the discussion. So there would be a rethinking of how we do accession based on the very different situation we have now compared to when the Commission established a accession criteria back in the 90s. The idea is not to lower the bar, but to create a politically powerful message to countries whose accession is held up because of war or opposition from capitals like Budapest, not just Ukraine but also Moldova and Albania, among others. It's important to send a political message, said the EU diplomat. The war of aggression has been going on for 4 years. Ukrainians need support. The EU must provide this support, politically and psychologically. While Zelensky has previously said Ukraine will not accept second-tier EU status, it could be open to something that codifies the country's path into the EU before it becomes a fully fledged member of the bloc, an official familiar with Kyiv thinking said. So that first part, when the idea of multi-speed Europe was brought in, one of the ideas is, okay, new countries could join, but they will not have veto rights, they will not have all the rights, etc., etc. So you would have like the full members and the others. And Ukraine, Zelensky has said, no, either I'm a full member of the EU or not. Which goes against this idea of the reverse enlargement, because the idea of the reverse enlargement is like, okay, you enter, but you only get the perks of the EU bit by bit. And so obviously you will not have full voting rights, etc., etc. So there is a bit of discussions to be had with the red line of Kiev for the time being. What about the Ukraine refugees all over the place in Europe? Should they go back to Ukraine if the war ends, but Ukraine is not in the EU? Well, I mean, the situation of Ukraine refugees is unrelated to the EU membership. The only question is Ukraine safe to return to? Yes or no? If after the war Ukraine is still not safe, then they will stay in Europe because it's not safe. If Ukraine becomes safe after the end of the war, they can go back to they will go back to Ukraine, regardless of the belonging to the EU and not belonging to the EU. Of course, once Ukraine joined the EU, that solved the problem because they're no longer refugees; they are European citizens. So of course the question is solved, but like, there's nothing that prevents Ukraine refugees to return to Ukraine after the war, provided that the country is safe. Of course, again, if assuming that Ukraine does not get back all its territories, if your Ukrainian refugees coming from Donbass, and that Donbass stays is in Russian control, yeah, probably they're not going to return there. Probably they will either move to the western part of Ukraine or stay in Europe, because they don't want to return to a Russian-controlled Donbass. Like, that's the situation for people who come from the occupied territory by Russia. That's a different situation. But for the rest of the country, that's not the core criteria, let's say. Where was I? A Moldovan official told Politico that the country wants to join the European Union that function effectively beyond 27 member states, and we welcome discussions on the internal reforms needed to make this possible. At the same time, full membership with equal rights and full participation in EU decision-making must remain the clear and final destination. There, yeah, the Moldovans, they are much more keen to compromise. They're saying, yeah, I don't give a fuck. Like, I just want in. If to get in fast, it means that I don't have all the rights immediately, fine. I'm fine with it. Just let me in. I'll do the work to then have all the rights that I have to. If you're unsatisfied with some reforms, etc., I'm fine. I'll do whatever you want. Just let me in. Which is not the current position of Ukraine. The Moldovans being a bit frustrated because, like I said, their candidacy is linked to Ukraine. And they're a package deal. And the problem that Moldova has is that their negotiations are going well. The negotiations with Moldova are going well. They're doing the work, etc., etc. Nobody has a problem with Moldova. The problem is that since their candidacy is linked to Ukraine, they can only move at the same speed as Ukraine. And since Ukraine candidacy is currently blocked by Hungary, Moldova has finished the current stage of negotiation, so they should move forward to the next step. They can't because Hungary is putting a veto on Ukraine at the moment, so they're kind of stuck. Problem with Moldova is the separatist region of Transnistria and Gaza. It would be the same as Cyprus and everything. And we will have the same template. I would imagine. Gagosian in English. That's for sure going to be part of the discussion. Like, Moldova on that front is going to be probably the same regime as Cyprus. Like, for Moldova, I expect that they're going to copy-paste the regime they have for Cyprus. That would be my guess. Probably maybe a bit stronger because you have a Russian presence in Transnistria, but I think they will use the Chypriot model for Moldova. Where was I? Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama told Politico last month that a creative approach to EU membership was a good idea and that his country would even accept temporarily not having its own commissioner. The idea has nonetheless its opponents within the EU. On principle, you cannot discuss two categories of member states, said an EU official. This wouldn't be fair not only to Ukraine, but also to the European project. The message should be to accelerate reform. So, okay, I'm trying to guess from which country that EU official comes from. My instinct would be probably that it's an Eastern country, but I'm not sure. There's a Russian-speaking presence in Estonia. Lot. Yeah, but that's a national policy. It's not an EU policy there. Not having your own commissioner is supposed to be part of the treaties. Yeah, but you have the annex. I mean, you're right on paper, but you have the the exemption ever since the Irish addendum. But on paper, you're right. Where was I? Germany in particular is against the idea of creating multiple tiers of EU membership and worried that countries that join the bloc before they're ready will be promised things Brussels won't be able to deliver, according to a senior diplomat. However, the hope is that if the EU's other heavy hitters such as Paris, Rome and Warsaw are behind the push, Berlin could be convinced. Step 3. Wait for Orban's departure. The challenge for Ukraine's membership prospect is getting all 27 member countries on board because any decision to expand the bloc requires unanimous support. So, when I explained the adhesion process, I say, okay, you have all the technical conditions to respect. Democracy, solid economy, catching up on all the euros, etc. But then, and even before that, like at each steps, you need to have the validation of the countries. At every step, all 27 member states must say, I'm okay, you can go ahead. And at the very end, of course, when all negotiations are over, the final say belongs to member states, who must agree unanimously, and there's a veto on adhesions. They must accept. If you don't have unanimity, you can tick all the boxes, you're not gonna join the EU. And like I said, Orban is opposed at the moment to Ukraine joining and has blocked de facto the process of adhesion of Ukraine. And regions. I didn't check, but I wonder if in Belgium, like the regions also have to vote on EU adhesions. I don't know that. Even if Orban goes, Magyar only promised to do a referendum on Ukraine joining. He would fail most probably. A conflict with Ukraine predates the war. Well, the referendum at least would be on the very end. I mean, Andros, like in the Hungarian constitution, do you have something on the EU adhesion like that makes a referendum mandatory, or it's like the government does what it wants? Like it can be a vote in parliament, it can be a referendum or whatever. In France, like the principle is a referendum, but if there is a supermajority, etc., it can go through parliament. But in principle, you're supposed to have a referendum for adhesions. It's not mandatory, okay. Yeah, I remember Wallonia blocking CETA. Yeah, I do remember that. But the very least, like, if we go through what Magyar is saying, Magyar promised a referendum at the end. So the final say would be to Hungarians. There would be a referendum on that. But in the meantime, it would be like we would probably say, okay, yeah, you can negotiate. I'm not blocking the technical negotiation. It's just at the very end, the final stage, the final ratification, I'm gonna do a referendum. Which, to be fair, a bunch of countries will probably do as well. Supermajority, France does not even have a normal majority. True. But probably, I mean, it's gonna be hard to it's hard to predict what France will do on that. I think it would be politically hard to not do a referendum on Ukraine. It's possible, but I think it would be politically hard, given how politically sensitive the question of Ukraine is. It will depend on the next president. I mean, it will depend on the next president and what the French parliament looks like. Because if he doesn't have a 3/5, if there is not a 3/5 majority in the French parliament in favor of Ukraine joining, he doesn't have a choice but the referendum. So that's going to solve it. Like, for instance, in when Croatia joined, there was no referendum. It went through the parliament. And like, that part is also why I also think it's absolutely insane to even think that Ukraine could join in 2027. Like, even if you do like the multi-tier EU adhesion, etc., like, politically that's insane, because you still have at the end the need for political validation by member states. I have a very hard time imagining a debate on Ukraine adhesion the same year as the French presidential election. Good fucking luck to have that discussion at the same time as the presidential election. Especially since the Ukrainian adhesions, like, there are plenty of issues or challenges linked specifically to the Ukrainian candidature. Because the problem with Ukraine, like, besides the fact that the country is at war, etc., a big issue with Ukraine, it's because it's a huge country. Just that is a challenge in itself. If Ukraine, sorry, I'm choking. Without reforms within the EU, the consequences of Ukraine joining would be insane. Particularly in two areas, agriculture and regional funds. Why? Because Ukraine is one of the biggest agriculture producer in Europe, meaning that the day they join Europe, you would have a massive part of the CAP, so the Common Agriculture Policy. A large part of that money would go straight to Ukraine. And you can be sure that the farmers that today benefit from CAP money, that suddenly would not have that money because that, or less money because that money would go to Ukraine, will not be thrilled about that. And also the idea of being in competition with Ukrainian farmers that are, like, again, a huge country, a huge agriculture country. So already agriculture, huge challenge. Second challenge, regional policy. The funds of the EU that go to regions to basically help them, like to the poor regions of Europe, to help them catch up. Same thing. Ukraine, especially after a war, they join the EU, they're going to just inhale the EU funds on that. And so countries, notably in Eastern Europe, that are big beneficiaries currently of EU regional funds, would touch far less than now, because it would all go to Ukraine, because Ukraine would need that money more than them. So that would create enormous budgetary and political problems just because of that, which of course are going to be front and center in any debate on Ukraine joining the EU. And if you speedrun the adhesion of the EU without the adhesion of Ukraine without solving this, the political viability of selling the Ukrainian adhesion, particularly if a country has to go through a referendum, will be kind of tricky. So yeah, another reason why I think that the Ukraine joining the EU next year is insane. I mean, and in the French context, like I said, I would be extremely afraid of putting the debate on Ukraine joining the same year as the French presidential election. Extremely worried. Like, to an extent, I would say that probably would be the dream of the far right. The far right would love to see that debate. Because they would hype up all the fears around Ukraine and use that as a campaigning tool to get all the farmers, all the people who have been told, "Oh, look at the Ukrainian workers that are going to steal our jobs, etc., etc., etc." It's going to be 2005 all over again. All right, let's continue. So yeah, Orban is against the thing, but the Commission and EU capitals are looking to the Hungarian election in April and also working on ways around Orban's veto. I mean, again, Orban's veto is another problem. They wait 40 to 50 MEPs. Maybe we should wait 2029. I mean, technically, we have the reserve MEPs. Today, we have 31 MEPs in reserve. So the European Parliament has a maximum, like in the treaties, it is said that the Parliament has a maximum of 751 MEPs. There can't be more MEPs than that, like the treaty are written today. In the latest reform, post-Brexit and everything, they basically put aside a number of seats. So even if on paper the maximum number of MEPs is 751, today there is 720 MEPs that are active. Meaning that we have 31 that are currently in reserve. So, in theory, I mean, yeah, in theory, you could say at a constant treaty, you could have Ukrainian MEPs, like 31 Ukrainian MEPs, joining immediately after. Until 2029, probably you would have to renegotiate a bit the repartition per country, etc., depending on the population. But yeah. they will be made observers. If they join, I don't think so. Like, if they join, they have MEPs. They don't have to wait until the next election. Like, they would organize European elections in Ukraine. Or maybe they would have an interim system that allow them to send a number of people to work as MEPs, etc. But I think they would have full-fledged MEPs. I think so. Like, I don't recall an example of a country joining and not having MEPs. Like Croatians, like when they joined, they immediately had MEPs. Like they had, before the date, some MEPs joining as observers, but they had people, and on the day right after the adhesion, I think they had MEPs. I would have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that was the case. Otherwise, that would be weird because they would have a vote in council, but no vote in parliament. I mean, again, that's another problem of speedrunning an adhesion in 1 year, because all the preparatory things that you have to do, even from on the EU side of things, to prepare a country joining, we don't have that time to prepare. So again, like this whole idea of speedrunning the Ukraine adhesion, like for me it's insane. Like I don't buy it for a second. And for me, again, it would be a mistake. Orban faces a tight contest and is behind the polls. He has weaponized the topic of Ukraine's EU membership in his campaign over the weekend, saying Ukraine is our enemy over its push to ban Russian energy imports and that it should never join the EU. None of the officials Politico spoke with said they believed Orban would change his mind before the election. Yeah, of course, he will never change his mind before the election. He will even like hype it up even more. Andros, like, so the Hungarian established outside of Hungary can vote. That's for sure. Like, I guess that's also the case for the Hungarians in Ukraine. So how does that work in that case? Like, given that the country is at war, like, do they have to vote by post? Do they have to vote in consulate? Like, do you have a special system like for the Hungarian community in Ukraine, or not? I seem to vaguely remember that you have like postal voting, consulate and embassies. Okay, I guess you have one in Lviv and Kiev. I would imagine. And remind me, like, how big is the population? Like the Hungarian population in Ukraine? Or maybe I can find it. Number of Hungarians, Ukraine. Between 75 and 90,000, at least according to Google. But it was 150,000 at the beginning of the century. Yeah, probably. Yeah, no, you're right. New competition takes more than 1 year. Deciding on the directive from drafting to voting takes more than a year. Nothing happens in less than a year in Europe. I mean, you can think of things that move very fast. That's not an issue. That's like if you're just talking about the legislative tool, not an issue. Like, that's doable. That is not the problem. If you're thinking, oh yeah, the law to have the adhesion, like, no. That's easy to do. You would do an emergency procedure that would go very fast. Parliament would not have to change anything. So that's not the part I'm worried about. Okay. The Hungarian Prime Minister antipathy for Kyiv runs deep, said one senior EU diplomat. It's a personal thing between Orban and Zelensky. It's more than a strategic or tactical play. Orban and Zelensky have repeatedly taken aim at one another. Zelensky publicly accused Orban of doing very dangerous things by blocking Ukraine's EU path and separately dubbed Budapest a little Moscow. Orban has called Ukraine one of the most corrupt countries in the world and accused Zelensky of issuing threats against Hungarian sovereignty. Several EU officials said they hope that if Orban loses the election, his rival Peter Magyar, the conservative leader of the opposition TISO? Shit, Andrews, help me. CISO, I think it's CISO. To me, it was CISO. CISO party could change tack on Ukraine, given he promised last year to put the issue to a referendum. But if Orban gets re-elected, it's on to step 4. TISA. TISA. Thank you. Step 4. Play the Trump card. While Orban's opposition to Ukraine joining the EU appears steadfast, there is one man European leaders believe could change his mind: Donald Trump. The US president, who is closely aligned with Orban and endorsed him ahead of the Hungarian elections, has made no secret of his desire to be the one who pushes Ukraine and Russia to do a peace deal. With EU accessions for Ukraine by 2027 written into a draft 20 points proposal to end the war, the hope is that Trump may call Budapest to get a deal done. Zelensky hints at this hope on Friday. Under the peace proposal, the US takes on the obligation that it is the guarantor that no one will block elements of the deal said. We talk about whether the United States of America will work with some European entities politically so that they don't block. The Trump administration previously pressed Orban during negotiations over the EU sanction package against Moscow, an EU diplomat said. You would count on Trump to indeed, if he thinks it's useful for him, to pressure Orban to drop a veto if that's in his interest. And final step, if all else fails, remove Hungary's voting rights. If Trump's out of the deal fails, there is one more card the EU has to play. Getting Article 7 of the EU treaty back on the table against Hungary, according to 2 EU diplomats. Article 7 deployed when a country is considered at risk of breaching the bloc's core values is the most serious political sanction the EU can impose because it can suspend a member's rights, including those on whether to make new countries members. The EU has no intention of making that push yet, assuming that doing so would play into Orban's ends ahead of his April election. But capitals are gauging support for using the tool if Orban is re-elected and continues to obstruct EU decision-making. Such a move is absolutely possible, a third diplomat said. Again, they're not so sure. Somehow I don't see Slovakia Czechia. Babiš is a bit more pragmatic, but like somehow I don't see Slovakia imposing an Article 7 on Hungary. Because so Article 7 is the tool to sanction politically a country. Like you have a country that is, for instance, throwing the rule of law out the window and EU values out the window. Technically, the council can sanction a member state up to removing its voting rights. That's Article 7. But to activate Article 7, you need unanimity minus the country concerned. Problem? Ever since for the past decade, we've had a few countries being problematic on the rule of law. Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, etc. But as I've just said, there was never just one. You always had several of them. And so that meant that whenever you were talking about sanctions through Article 7, well, if you do an Article 7 against Hungary, Slovakia is going to put a veto. And then when you make an Article 7 against Slovakia, Hungary is going to put a veto. So they're covering each other, meaning that the Article 7 was de facto neutralized. That's why then the Commission, the member state created the conditionality system to basically remove EU funds that doesn't require unanimity. So that was another system created to circumvent Article 7. But like, yeah, even in the case of making Ukraine join the EU, I don't see Slovakia or even Italy accepting to put an Article 7 against Hungary. Unless, like, again, you have Trump going hard on, like, declaring war to Orban and pressuring Slovakia and Italy to isolate even further Orban, which, again, I'm not sure that Trump would do it. But... So yeah, the 5 steps to get the EU, to get Ukraine to join the EU in 1 year, you will understand that I have a few doubts. Like, for me, there's a lot of copium and wishful thinking in this, to say the least. Do we have any questions? That was the last article, so any question on that or other things before we close down for the night? Up. If there's no question, I'll do the program for next week. And then we'll go have dinner. At least in my case. And slowly get ready. Trump is adding a secret condition to receive a Nobel Prize. I mean, you can bet that if he gets through the Ukraine peace deal, like Ukraine will push. I mean, he will make it a condition that Ukraine at least puts his name as for the Nobel Prize. Like you can be certain of it. MSC expectations? Not particularly. Like I haven't. To be fair, I haven't looked too much into the Munich Security Convention this year, so I don't know. Like Vance is not going this year. I think Macron is making a speech there. I think. I'm not sure. So I haven't like looked too much into it. Yeah, Rubio is going. Or Rubio is gonna. He's gonna be fine. Rubio is the good cop in the Infernal trio, so I think he will maybe not play nice, but he won't play as rough as Vance would do. That would be my guess. All right. Let me tell you the program. Next week we're gonna have a reverse agenda. Because on Monday I have a Regesser, so my show on Arte. So Monday night, Regesser on the channel of Arte for the French. Already put that in your agenda. So that means that on Tuesday evening I'm going to stream in French to do the debrief plus news review. And so on the Friday at 5, I will do the news review in English. So you take the normal schedule and you reverse it. So yeah, that's the problem for next week. Where is Regesser this time? In Brussels? No. It's in Paris. We do Paris. Like the one in Brussels was an exceptional thing. I hope it's not going to be the only time we do it. But no, we are in the normal setup, so in Paris, in the backseat studios and everything, so the normal setup. And to tease you, we're going to talk about a place where it's cold and stuff has happened recently, which is of course Charleroi, as you all know. And I'll put on the Discord the link for those who are in Paris if you want to come in the public. I'll put that in the Discord, which makes me think up putting the social media there. Otherwise, well, I hope that you enjoyed today's news review. It was a bit longer than usual, and one day later, sorry again for that. And yeah, thanks for those who followed. If you have a Prime that is lying around, do toss a coin to your streamer. That's always appreciated. Thanks Tikanis again for the resub, and I will see you next time on Friday for the news review in French, or next week for further adventures. Have a good one, guys. See you next time.